My name's Steve Woods, and I want to talk today about, title of the presentation is How Modern Marketing Works, which presenting to a group of sophisticated marketers, I think is a not an overly humble presentation, especially since I'm actually a technologist. But I tried to get one guy's opinion and a couple of observations as the title, but our team wouldn't have it. So I want to talk a little bit about marketing, and I'm going to come at this from the perspective of marketing technology. I've had the privilege of being in the marketing space for almost 14 years now as Chief Technology Officer with a company called Eloqua, you may be familiar with. Now we're part of the Oracle family as of about a year ago. So I've been around marketers, been around marketing technology for a long time. And I want to talk about the way that modern marketers today are being successful. To do so, though, I want to make the point that the foundations of marketing have not changed. You still, as you always have had to, you have to understand your buyer so you can target the right buyer. Deep understanding of who that individual is. You have to engage with those buyers and really come up with something meaningful that connects with them, that changes their perspective. If you can do that, you have the opportunity to convert them to revenue in some form, whether it's an online transaction or a salesperson making a transaction happen on paper. And if you've done this, then you can analyze the overall process, learn from it, and do better the next time around. Those foundations are the same today as they have been for hundreds of years. Nothing different there. But in the last few decades, we've introduced amazing technologies. You're all familiar with them. The way that we communicate has fundamentally changed. You've heard a lot about that. And that has added a layer to those fundamental tenets of marketing that make modern marketing quite different than marketing of a decade or more ago. And I want to talk about technology, and I'm going to introduce a couple of pieces of technology to make a few points here. But what I want to talk about more than anything is not how technology can make us more efficient or faster or more analytical. I want to talk about how technology can help make us more human. So let's look at these in order. First of all, targeting. Understanding your customer enough to make a connection with them. This is very different today than it ever has been. And to understand that, to put that in context, I want to go back a few years. I want to go back to 1439 or so, when this guy, Johann Gutenberg, invents the printing press, movable type. We're all fairly familiar with that invention. Very interesting invention. Introduces for the first time ever the ability to mass produce information. You can set up the printing press, takes a little bit of upfront work, but once you do that, you can print thousands upon thousands of books. He was a brilliant inventor, not so good as an entrepreneur. His initial venture, the Gutenberg Bible, spiraled completely out of control, got into massive debt, lost control of the project. So he doesn't leave us a legacy of entrepreneurial wisdom. He leaves us a legacy of how we think about information. And the way we think about information is what I would call an economic filter on quality. Because if you're going to publish information in this manner, you have that upfront cost. And if you pick the right information to publish, then on the back end, you recoup that by selling many, many, many instances at a very low marginal cost. So publishers have to become economic filters on quality. They have to pick good material to publish that approaches a large audience in order to make their money back. And it's a brilliant model. And if you think about it from the economics perspective, it's the same economic model that permeates every form of mass media that we know. Newspapers, books, movies, CDs, they all have that same model where the publisher has to act as an economic filter of quality in order to get that out to a large audience of willing purchasers. And as marketers, we've all grown up in this. Nobody was born before 1439. We've all grown up in this world. We are completely accustomed to this world. And in marketing, it's been brilliant for us because we've got a very good economic relationship with those publishers. We can write them a check for the privilege of bypassing that economic filter on quality. Call it a media placement or an ad buy, but that's really what we're doing. We're saying, I have a piece of crappy content which would not stand on its own merits. I would like to get that in front of the large audience that you have amassed. And for that privilege, I will write you a check. That's what we're doing with any form of mass media placement. And it worked very, very well for a long time. What it let us do, if we take a step back and say, okay, what's really going on here, is it let us access the audiences that these publishers had put together. And the audiences they'd put together were the largest possible audiences they could amass for their piece of information. That's why they were trying to do this. And that meant that those people had to share common facts. Same demographics, same firmographics, bizographics. And that allowed us to target based on those facts about the audience. If you wanted to target the buyers of widgets, you would go to the publisher of Widget Magazine and place an ad in Widget Magazine because that's where widget buyers generally went. You're targeting about facts about the audience that don't really change over time. They're not different this week than they were last week. They don't have opinions. They're just generic facts that are static over time. And the model worked extraordinarily well until it didn't. This is a chart, probably surprised no one here, is looking at one of the categories. This is newspaper ad revenue, goes from 1950, nice steady growth, all the way through to about 2010, 2011. The model fails catastrophically. You can see there, nothing to do with recessions, nothing to do with any other challenges, any secular challenges. The model has failed catastrophically. And the reason the model failed catastrophically is this. And I'm not talking about social media. I'm talking about the ability for anyone with a laptop and a Starbucks card to publish information that can be read by anyone on the planet. Not will, but can. And if you think about that through the lens of Gutenberg, it's very, very interesting how a model that we've had in place since 1439 has now completely disappeared, completely changed. Because what that means is that economic filter on quality is now no longer the dominant force on how information is governed. And anyone that's read majority of blogs out there will probably realize that clearly there is no economic filter on quality. So what ends up happening here, sorry, the slide disappeared. Well, that's very interesting. What ends up happening here is an interesting thing. If you think about the information that a buyer needs in order to make their way through a buying process, at the top, it's a good fit with mass media. They need general information about a space. But as they dig further in, they need much more detailed information, specifics that aren't interesting to a mass audience. And so what used to happen was you would call in vendor salespeople who would educate you about a space, educate you about what was going on, educate you about their products, so on and so forth. Because that information, being a very limited audience, was not something that the mass media could ever deal with. It didn't make sense. You would never put that in mass media because it was only applicable to a small audience. You would have salespeople convey that information. And this conversation between a salesperson and a prospect was a two-way conversation. The salesperson was able to read the body language of that buyer. What are they interested in? What's got their attention? What distracts them? What are they offended by? And through the conversation, understand what their hot buttons were, who's interested, how interested are they, and what can I potentially sell to them. With publishing moving from mass media only to any form of media, though, we disintermediate that conversation. That buyer can now get their information anywhere they want, and so they do. They don't call in vendor salespeople. So the role of marketing fundamentally changes. Rather than looking at buyers based on the facts about them, sorry, let me flip around in slides here a little bit, they're out of order. Rather than just looking at the facts on a buyer, what marketing needs to retrain themselves to do is look at what we call digital body language. By understanding the nuances of what every individual looks at, what they search for, what they look at online, what they click on, what emails they engage with, what social media content they engage with, what ads they click on. By understanding all of that and putting that together in a picture that a salesperson can understand and that you can use in order to target an audience, marketing is able to replace what a salesperson was able to read in that one-on-one conversation. So the foundation of modern marketing is that digital body language, that deep understanding of a buyer, not just about the facts of who they are, but about their interests, their engagement, the things that change week by week, day by day. They may be interested today, 3 weeks from now, maybe they're not interested, not worth targeting them with a specific message anymore. So modern marketing, we need to understand and target based on digital body language. If we can do that, then the next question is, how do we engage? How do we get a conversation in front of the people that are hopefully going to purchase from us? And this is an interesting one because if you look at a juxtaposition of engagement between two industries, marketing trying to engage people and Hollywood trying to engage people, you can kind of see my point here. Stories engage us. Press releases, maybe not so much. And we need to drill into this. We need to understand this because we as marketers are trying to change the perspectives of humans, of real people that are going to buy our products and services. And if we're going to engage them, we need to do through stories because that's how humans engage. So what makes the Hollywood story better than the press release? Well, it's got depth of character. It has an event. It has tension to it. Those are the factors that make stories happen. So if we're going to tell the story of our business, we need to have those events and that depth of character and that dynamic tension, or it's not going to engage the people that we're hoping to engage. The easiest way to assess this, very mathematical test that I call the beer test. Would you tell this story to a good friend of yours over beers on a patio? And if you assess a lot of the content that you put out there, honestly, by the beer test, it doesn't pass. It's not a story. It's not engaging. But we can do this. Even if you look at brands that are not necessarily inherently exciting, there's a lot of stories around them. Ritz-Carlton, great example. So a father and his 3 sons were at Radio City Music Hall at about 1 o'clock in the morning, camped out, waiting for 5 hours later for the ticket booth to open so that they could get the NFL draft wrist passes. And up drives a cab. Out of the cab pops the doorman from the Ritz-Carlton, covers them all with blankets, hands them hot chocolate, jumps back in the cab and speeds away. It's got humanity to it. It's got an event in the lives of the people that it matters to. It's got some depth of character. It's a story that is meaningful. Unlike this event. It's all right. And anyone that's ever purchased an Apple product is familiar with the event of opening that product. The box, the packaging, all beautifully designed to present the product to you and make the most emotionally of the event of you bringing that product home and being thrilled at being a new owner. But there's effort that goes into that. There's an individual at Apple who spends a month in a room opening up package after package, peeling off piece of plastic after piece of plastic to make sure that that event is the most magical it can possibly be. Taking that event seriously in the lives of the people you're trying to serve is what makes it something that we engage with, that we talk about, that we tell to our friends. And it can go dreadfully wrong. I'm sure most marketers are familiar with the story of United. The event here, of course, is Dave Carroll takes a flight and the baggage handlers accidentally break his Taylor guitar. He takes this event very seriously. It's very meaningful in his life for his guitar to be broken. The United service reps don't take it quite so seriously, and so he writes a song, United Breaks Guitars, that gets 13.5 million views on YouTube. These events have the meaning that engages the people we're trying to serve, and we need to take them seriously. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, the fundamental thing is recognizing the events in the lives of the buyers. Thinking about the world from a very different perspective. What marketers tend to have is a campaign-centric view of the world. It is April 1st, and on April 1st, I'm going to launch a campaign to 1 million people with some mild differentiation of content. But that's an event in my life as a marketer. What we need to do is become buyer-centric and recognize the events in our buyer's world and then react to those individual events. And this is hard because they're individuals. So what we need to do as modern marketers is think very differently. Use that digital body language to identify what the events are for one individual buyer. And then based on that, put a sequence of communications in front of that individual buyer that makes sense for him or her. And then use technology, use automation to scale that up to millions of buyers. But it's a very different way of thinking about it, from a campaign-centric view on my calendar to a buyer-centric view on my buyer's calendar. And that lets us break the paradox of the love-hate relationship we have with email. Because it's interesting. A lot of times when people think of marketing automation, they think of email. It's one of the communication platforms that marketing automation can use, and by far the dominant one. And it's interesting because we all hate email, right? We hate email as marketers. We feel kind of dirty sending it. We hate email as recipients. We hate receiving it. But if you look at the stats, as recipients, for a message that someone wants to receive, by a factor of 10, people prefer receiving that message over email than any other form of communication. And on the sender side, marketers consistently rank email as their most high-performing channel. So we love it, but we hate it. The difference comes down to how we think about engaging those buyers. If we become buyer-centric, and the message that we deliver is meaningful and surrounds an event in that individual's life, then it can be very successful, it can be widely accepted, it can be something that people enjoy receiving. If we're campaign-centric and we say, it's April 1st, I'm going to blast 1 million emails out, then it becomes what we all hate about email, undifferentiated and an intrusion. So if we can do this, we can understand digital body language to understand what is going on in the lives of individual buyers. We can then engage them by understanding the events in their world. The next thing we have to think about is how we convert them to revenue in some way. And I'll focus in on environments where there is a salesperson involved, because it opens up some of the nuances, which I think are quite applicable in all areas. But let me just focus in on organizations that have a salesperson involved. So the challenge here, there's often a temptation to say, okay, if we've made all this information available, we've got all this information out there, everything you need from the top-level understanding of a space right through the details of the product, its features, how it compares, its pricing, that's all out there. Why do we still need salespeople? And in thinking through that, I'm often reminded, I hope there's no economists in the room, of the way economists tend to view humans, these logical, rational actors. And you have this base layer of mathematics, and on top of that mathematics, you can model human behavior. You're all good, plug it into some equations, and you're done. But that's not how it actually works. Humans are kind of complicated. On top of math, we can model the laws of physics, and that kind of works. Physics guides the reactions that we see in the discipline of chemistry. Chemistry is what makes biology actually happen. Biology gives us the psychology that we have as primates. And on top of our psychology are the behaviors that make us human. Not easy to model using strict mathematics. We have to understand that what we're dealing with are humans that are going to make a buying decision. And that buying decision is not rational. A couple of things. Choices can be framed. Great example here. On the right, a pound of coffee. We've got a model for that. We've got a frame. Pound of coffee from Starbucks, nice high-end coffee, about $18. Maybe a cheaper version, you get about $11. Ultra high-end, maybe in the 20s. We have a model for what a pound of coffee costs us. But that model is grounded in the frame of the 1 pound bag. If we do what Nespresso did, we break the frame. You take that same ground coffee and you stick it into an individual serving, a little plastic cup. And now we can't compare it against a pound of coffee because it's an individual serving. Costs 30 cents. Is that a good price? Is that a bad price? The only frame that we have is the frame of another individual serving. At Starbucks, you get an individual coffee for about $2. 30 cents sounds like a reasonable price. But all we've done is change the frame. If you open up those little plastic packages and you pour the ground coffee into the bag until the bag is full, you now have a pound of ground coffee again. The bag would cost you $98. We've changed the frame fundamentally, and it is a very meaningful thing to do as we guide the human behaviors that go through that buying decision. Give you another example of how humans are not exactly rational. Options can be anchored. This is Mahatma Gandhi. Two different groups were given two questions. First question, one group was given the question of, did Mahatma Gandhi die at the age of 9? Second group was given the question, did Mahatma Gandhi die at the age of 140? Both groups got the answers right. It's kind of illogical. Those are all impossible numbers. The second question was the same for both groups. What age did he die? The group that was anchored to 9 years old guessed on average 50 years old. The group that was anchored to 140 guessed 67 years old, a 17-year difference based on an anchor that everyone knew was completely illogical, absolutely meaningless. So choices can be anchored. We are not rational beings. And there's nobody better at framing and anchoring than salespeople. But we need to build trust in order to have that conversation with sales. So how does trust get created? Because it's this sort of amorphous quality that you all understand but can't really define. Some interesting experiments on trust. This one's a derivative of sort of the prisoner's dilemma experiment that you've probably seen many times. In this one, the trustor on the left has $10. They're able to take any amount of those $10 and give them to the trustee. And when they do that, the amount that they give will be tripled. At that point, the trustee can take any of the money that they've got and give any amount of it back. Pretty simple experiment. If you do it once, there's no trust. Why would I give this person money when they may not give any of it back? But if you start doing this experiment in multiple rounds, that trust grows, that trust gets built. And over time, you see people exchanging vastly more money than the people that ran in a single round. Trust is something that is built over time as people are able to help each other. And it's that trust that as modern marketers, we need to help our sales teams develop. So what we need to do is look for opportunities to have our salespeople create trust with the buyers that they're serving. And we can do that. Again, coming back to the idea of the digital body language of the buyer, we can start looking for moments when there's an opportunity to help out. When they're searching for something, when they're struggling with something, when they're trying to find certain pieces of information, or they're at a point where a conversation with somebody who has expertise in the area might be helpful. Looking for those moments gives our sales team opportunities to build trust. And it's that alignment between marketing and sales that makes modern marketing teams incredibly effective at driving revenue. If you look at the stats, this is from a combination of Forrester and Aberdeen research here, very few organizations are able to claim that they are tightly aligned between marketing and sales, that they're identifying those trust-building opportunities. Only 8% were able to claim that. And for the ones that weren't, the other 92%, top-line revenue declined year on year 7%. Significant top-line impacts by not having that alignment. But if you flip it around, for the 8% that were well-aligned and were identifying those trust-building opportunities, top-line revenue grew by 32%. So if we can do this, if we can identify those opportunities to build trust, we can bring our salespeople in at the right moment, they can leverage the information that's out there, but frame the options, anchor the choices, and guide those buyers along, we can drive significantly more revenue for the organizations that we serve. Proven out time and time again. So then the question is, okay, if we've understood our buyers, we've engaged them, we've converted them, how do we better understand what's going on? Because marketing analytics is kind of tricky. We've been struggling with this for decades. And a lot of this, again, comes down to looking at the underlying people that we're trying to analyze, those humans. One of the things here that's very interesting, marketing has a long history of using a focus group to understand what's going on. You bring people into a room, maybe 10, 15, 20 people, you sit them down at a table, feed them some mediocre coffee and pastries, and ask them questions about what they think of a product. And I'm reminded in that scenario of asking the guy on the left, the video store clerk, if you can travel back with me to a time when we had video stores and video stores had clerks, the guy on the left who's a video store clerk, asking him, what movie should I watch? And this guy's an expert in videos. He works in a video store. He watches a lot of videos. He prides himself on his knowledge of the best possible videos. And he's going to recommend something you've never heard of, something very creative, very artsy, a little bit edgy. He's never going to recommend Titanic. But Titanic is a wildly popular movie. And the reason for this is that he's acting differently. He's acting as what we call a maximizer. Somebody who's trying to find the best possible option for a scenario. Most of us, when we go and rent a movie, are acting as what is called a satisficer. We're trying to find a movie that is most assuredly not shit. There's no downside risk to buying this movie. It might not be the best, but it's not going to be terrible. We want to minimize that downside risk. It's a very different way of thinking about a problem, and in most of our lives, in most of the decisions that we make, we act as satisficers. We just want something that is good enough and there's no downside risk. It's not going to be a problem. But if you bring people into a room and sit them at a table and ask them opinions on a product or a service or a market space, they try and act like maximizers because that's what you've asked them to do. And so they come up with opinions that are unrelated to what they would actually do in reality because they're trying to act like the video store clerk when they're actually, in their regular behavior, going to be the person who rents Titanic. So what we actually need to do as modern marketers to understand the humans that are underlying this behavior is not ask them directly, but look at the data. Look at what the data tells us. Which leads to an interesting challenge, because if you look at the metrics in any of your marketing worlds, and a certain ratio between X and Y is 13%. Is that good? Is that bad? Should you get a raise? Should you get fired? You don't know. It's just 13%. What you need to do to understand what's meaningful there is place that against the rest of the world. What are every other marketer seeing for that ratio between X and Y? Am I in the top quartile, the bottom quartile? If I compare myself against people in my industry, am I now top quartile, bottom quartile? And modern marketers are doing this. This is the power of big data and software as a service, comparing metrics across the universe of marketers so they can understand not just what their metrics are, but how they should care about them and which ones they should invest in. A very powerful approach to understanding those metrics. Unfortunately, it tends to lead to the next idea, which is, well, can we use this data to predict the behavior of buyers? We understand it, can we use it to predict? And I'm often reminded of Yogi Berra's famous quote that predictions are hard, especially ones about the future, which is kind of true. So before we look at predicting marketing, you're probably going to say that, expect me to say that humans are kind of a complex problem to predict. Let's look at a simple problem and understand if we're any good at this. Weather. 4 variables. Only 4 variables predict all weather. Temperature, pressure, that's 3. Not very good at counting. Temperature, pressure, humidity, and airspeed. That's it. 4 variables. We have tons of data on weather stretching back centuries. We can measure those 4 variables around the atmosphere extraordinarily well, and we apply huge amounts of computing power to modeling what weather is going to be. Are we any good at it? Here's the data. The blue line is just taking the historical average of what the weather was on that day. The red and yellow lines are the predictions. The yellow line is the worst to date. If I tell you that Saturday is going to be rainy, and then I say, no, it's going to be sunny, and then they say, no, it's going to be rainy, what's my worst prediction to date? The red line is the prediction on the day of. You can see here that we're not bad about 6 days out. After that, we're slightly worse than just taking the historical average and saying it'll kind of be what it's always been. 4 variables, lots of computing power, we're terrible at predicting it. We are not going to be able, in my lifetime, to predict the behavior of an individual human buying something. But there is hope, because rather than looking at an individual and trying to predict them, we can look at the world through different lenses, and it gives us the ability to understand what's going on there. Here's an interesting example, which is earthquakes. We have no ability to predict earthquakes. We've been trying for many years. They're complicated. We can't predict them. There's not much hope in sight in terms of actually predicting when an earthquake is going to happen. But if you look at any given area and you graph the magnitude of earthquakes and their frequency on a log-log scale, you always get this nearly perfect straight line. And that lets you actually work with the data. You can't predict it, but if you want to know where you should invest extra money to have earthquake-ready buildings or shelters or extra emergency services on hand, this gives you the ability to understand by applying a certain lens to the data. And that's the mindset that we need to bring to marketing. Rather than saying, how can I predict the behavior of an individual? Let's put lenses on our data. We call them attribution models. And say, okay, if I look at a model that teases out which campaign brought people into the top of the funnel, these are the campaigns that stick out. If I look at a model that says which campaigns actually cause that individual to take a call with sales, these are the campaigns that stick out. Which campaign tended to push a person to make a buying decision? These are the campaigns that stick out. By looking at the world not through the lens of prediction, but through the lens of understanding trends and patterns, we can come up with a better way of modeling the behavior of the humans that are in our buying funnels. So hopefully that's given you a few things to think about. Understanding that the fundamental tenets of marketing have not changed, but in the last few decades, technology has given us a different way of understanding those buyers so we can better target them, of engaging them, of bringing their humanity into our thought processes around how we convert them, and then analyzing what's happened so we can learn from it. We're in an interesting space today where technology can give us the ability not just to be more efficient and more effective, but also just a little bit more human. Thank you very much. And I think we've got plenty of time for questions, or I can give you back a few minutes of your day. I know I'm the last of the day, so any questions? That's a crowd that's going to the bar. Fantastic. Yes?
So you're talking about, engaging with customers and creating stories. On the back end, so the upside down part of the purchase funnel, the pyramid at the bottom for advocacy, how does that, with social media and everything, how does that factor in or change things?
Sure. So if I can paraphrase the question, so how does the storytelling and the engagement relate to advocacy in the post-sales era? And I think that's a key point. It's absolutely critical. It's critical to have advocates that love your product, that are very interested in your product. But if you look at the behavior of people and what they talk about over beers with their buddies or on Facebook, it's not enough just to feel good about something. You need a story that you're telling. You need to have something that is going to make a narrative that you're going to then tell to your buddies or share. So having that event and that moment and that story built into the offering around your product makes it easier for an advocacy campaign to be successful. You obviously have to have them also feel very good about your product and have a good positive emotion there, but they need something to say, and the story gives them that narrative that they will then share. So I think you need both for advocacy to be successful, stories and positive feelings. Yes?
So especially for the software industry, a lot of companies are focusing on creating stories through written case studies, but they're often very lengthy, and by the time you actually get to tell the entire customer story, you've already lost a prospect's attention. Is there a particular format that would work better for a case study, or are case studies still relevant, or are people still going to be with shortening?
Question is, are case studies still relevant? I think that on the evolutionary scale, case studies are generally just one click above press releases. They're generally really bad. They're not... I don't have anything against the idea of a case study, but the execution in a lot of organizations is quite poor. And the case study, it's not a story. It's a structured product pitch, essentially, which doesn't bring people along. I think there are case studies that are brilliantly done, but they're written in a narrative style that really makes you feel for the person that was involved and what was going on in their lives and how they overcame certain odds in order to accomplish something, more so than just, I had a problem, I implemented this product, and I achieved 13% ROI. That's not a narrative, that's a product pitch. But the ones that involve the narrative are the ones that get talked about, that get retold, and that are easy to commit to memory, so your sales team can very quickly start using them again. So I think the execution on case studies certainly has a lot of upside potential to become better and become more storytelling, but many organizations are not particularly skilled at that. Yes? Outside of Apple, who develops trust? It's a good question. I think, shooting from the hip here, but I think you're going to see that same development of a trust narrative in high-end automotive. Great example, if you look anywhere from, you've got your classics there, Mercedes, BMW, and they've got a long history of trust, so there's some interesting stories to dig into there, but you've also got perhaps more interesting brand development history around the Lexuses and the Acura. I mean, these are very, very new brands, 20-ish years ago. I'm probably dead wrong on that, but they're quite recent, and they came on the backs of organizations who in the 1970s, the Hondas and the Toyotas, had quite the opposite reputation for being flimsy, cheap, falling apart. So there, they spent a lot of time associating themselves with images of trust, telling stories around that, and really building that narrative. I think that'd be a good, I don't know those particularly, but I think there's a great place to go to look for someone who has developed trust in a fairly short period of time. And again, it's a category where people don't necessarily understand all of the inner workings of a car. You just have to rely that when I buy a car from this manufacturer, I feel assured that it's going to be of good quality. I'm not going to rip the engine apart and figure out piece by piece if it is. It's just got to go on reputation alone. There's a question here somewhere. Yes? What are modern marketers not particularly good at? I think in the work that I've had the pleasure of doing with marketers, I think one of the most difficult challenges to overcome is that shift from campaign-centric thinking to buyer-centric thinking. That's hard. We all grew up in an era of campaign-centric thinking. Most organizations still to this day, these are the campaigns that I'm running. And it fits everything inside the organization just beautifully. You budget around a single unit campaign. You get it approved as a single unit. Your analytics then are very clear. I launched 1 million of whatever the promotion is, and I got this as a percentage. That works very, very well. The shift to a buyer-centric world where you have these campaigns that identify events and then react to those buyers is much more difficult because you turn them on and they run for 3, 4, 5 years. The welcome to our organization campaign when a person first purchases a product, the education campaign you'd put in front of someone when you first interact with them, so on and so forth. All of those campaigns, you just turn them on, they run continuously. So mentally, it's very difficult to shift the mindset around plannings, approvals, analytics, to move to that continuous mode from the campaign-centric mode. I think that's probably one of the most difficult things organizationally to overcome. It's a great question. Great. All right, well, thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.